Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Teniola Shubowale. We begin with updates of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. A British man, Paul Ure, who was captured by Russian-backed separatists in Ukraine, has died in detention. The Presidium Network and Aid Group, which has been helping his relatives, say the 45-year-old's family were contacted by the UK Foreign Office. The UK says it's seeking urgent clarification from Ukraine and the Russian government on reports of the British aid worker's death. Mr. Ure was detained in the self-proclaimed Donetsk People's Republic in April and accused of being a mercenary. He was taken prisoner along with another man, Dylan Healy, while reportedly trying to conduct a humanitarian rescue mission on the 25th of April.
We have no evidence of his background within terms of the military side of things. He was never within the military capacity, especially in Ukraine. And he was, when they were detained, they were unarmed. They had civilian clothing on. And there is no evidence that we can see and from the family that he had any real military background with and was just there as a volunteer. The fact that he was helping with evacuations unarmed, there was no way he would have been anywhere near mercenary activity, let alone military. What we do know is that through an informal Facebook group, he was basically asked with Dylan Healy to help evacuate a lady and child south of Zaporozhye who had been allowed to come to the UK. But basically it was in the Russian territory. They still went over, and we know they were captured at the first Russian checkpoint in that area. And we've known that they've been detained since the early hours of the morning on the 25th of April. Yes, there's been reports from both the family and from the government in the past that they were putting some pressure on, and especially looking at some prisoner swaps and really increasing that pressure. And they've been doing this for some time with other captives as well. So yeah, they are really using these personnels as political pawns within this conflict, which is absolutely disgraceful, and we can completely condemn that as well.
In other developments, authorities are still looking for nearly 20 people missing in Venezia after a missile hit an office building on Thursday morning. The death toll has gone to 23, including 3 children. At least 71 people, also including children, have been hospitalized, and 117 have applied for medical help. The missiles hit an office block and damaged nearby residential buildings, causing a huge blaze which spread to a car park and set vehicles alight. Ukraine says Moscow has intensified missile attacks far from the front line and that it has deliberately hit civilian sites, while Russian forces have been grinding out gains on the battlefield in the east, pummeling urban areas with artillery.
Just now we have 21 dead and more than 90 injured people here. All people are civilian people. We have information about 43 people which missing, but we understand that part of them in hospital now, and part of them is dead, unfortunately.
The Ukrainian president has addressed an international conference aimed at persecuting war crimes committed in Ukraine, telling them Russian missiles hit 2 community facilities in the west, killing at least 20 people and injuring many more. At least 40 European judicial authorities were at the meeting, where they agreed to coordinate investigations into atrocities during Russia's invasion of Ukraine, as the size of their task was highlighted by fresh attacks on civilians far from the war's front lines. 45 countries were represented at the conference holding in The Hague, and they all signed a political declaration to work together on investigations. Officials say that with more than 20,000 war crimes investigations open in different countries heading teams, evidence needs to be credible and organized.
Сьогодні вранці російські ракети вдарили по нашому місту Вінниця.
Today, in the morning, Russian missiles hit the city of Vinnytsia, an ordinary peaceful city, Cruise missiles hit 2 community facilities. Houses were destroyed. A medical center was destroyed. Cars and trams were on fire. This is an act of Russian terror. These are not people. These are bastards who have done it. So 2 cruise missiles hit the city center. 20 people died as of now, including 3 children. And there's a huge number of wounded people. I would like you to observe a minute of silence for all the people who got killed between 2014 and today. All those who were murdered by Russia on Ukrainian soil and in our Ukrainian sky.
На нашій українській землі та українському небі.
Meanwhile, Ukraine's top war crimes prosecutor and European judicial authorities have met to coordinate investigations into atrocities during Russia's invasion of Ukraine, warning that a failure to do so would embolden autocrats. Officials say with more than 20,000 war crimes investigations open and different countries' head-on teams, evidence needs to be credible and organized. ICC prosecutor Karim Khan says children, women and men are living in terror, suffering in Ukraine and in so many different parts of the world. Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba also reiterated his country's call for establishment for a special tribunal for Russia's actions in Ukraine.
Just like a climate strategy and a COVID strategy, we need an accountability strategy. A strategy driven by the universal belief that all of us are protected by law, ensuring that all roads lead to justice, now and in the future.
That as we speak, children, women and men, the young and the old, are living in terror. They're suffering in Ukraine and in so many different parts of the world, grieving about what they lost yesterday, holding their breath about what they could lose today and what tomorrow can bring. At a time like this, the law cannot be a spectator. The law cannot recline in comfort in The Hague or anywhere else for that matter, when it's meant to protect and uphold certain principles that are essential for humanity.
Ukraine calls on the establishment of a special tribunal which would have a specific jurisdiction over the crime of aggression against Ukraine. We have heard a number of reservations since the idea first floated in the early March. Most of them express concern that this effort could replace existing international courts and tribunals, thus weakening them. I want to clearly reiterate, we do not have any such intention, and this will not be the outcome of our effort. In fact, we have always been working closely with all international courts and tribunals, and in particular, the ICC.
Coordination, it's an important word because we have to work not only for the next months, the next years, but maybe the next decades. And we will continue to do that to bring all the perpetrators of atrocities in Ukraine to justice.
To other stories now, it's day one of the G20 finance ministers meeting in Indonesia, and the country's finance minister, Sri Mulyani Indrawati, says it's vital for leaders to reach a consensus during the talks, warning that otherwise it could be challenging for low-income countries facing soaring food and energy prices. Finance leaders from the group of 20 major economies are meeting in Bali as host Indonesia tries to find common ground in a group frayed by the Ukraine war and rising economic pressures from soaring inflation. Sir Mulyani called for G20 members to talk less about politics and build bridges between each other to deliver more technical decisions and action.
When we last met in April, it was in a very challenging circumstances. And today, we are meeting with the challenging circumstances which even more deepen. So the triple threat of war, surging commodity prices, and increased global inflation that can also increase and creating a real spillover to debt, not only for the low-income countries, but also in the middle-income countries, or even advanced economy. We are starting before pandemic and then because of pandemic as already using our fiscal space that have the implication of increasing debt position. And now, with this triple threat, this is going to be even more a very dire complex to be managed. So I'm sure you are all aware that the world is watching us closely. There are high expectations for this forum, for this meeting, especially because this is the finance minister and central bank governor, that we are hoping that we can discuss and talk more on a less political but real technical and issue which is matter for all of us. We need to act together to demonstrate why G20 deserves its reputation as the premier forum for international cooperation. So coming together here today is really a big step forward in working through our differences in position and in building bridges toward each other. I hope I can count on you all to find ways that we can maintain the G20's strong track records and working collaboratively to deal with this global crisis. This means that when our meeting ends tomorrow, we will have been able to find a way to reach consensus on what we can do together with the spirit of cooperation and collaboration.
Meanwhile, U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen is urging the group of 20 major economies to take urgent action to address a short-term food insecurity crisis exacerbated by Russia's war in Ukraine and avoid markets distorting export restrictions and stockpiling. Yellen, speaking at a meeting of G20 finance officials in Indonesia, says countries should target fiscal support measures to help those most in need, rather than adopting costly and aggressive blanket subsidies. She also called on G20 members to boost their spending to address existing food security challenges linked to conflict, climate change, and economic shocks from the COVID-19 pandemic that had grown worse due to war-related increases in food, fertilizer, and fuel prices.
We must take action to address the short-term food insecurity crisis and, equally important, the longer-term drivers of food insecurity, including the nexus with climate change. The speed and wisdom of our decisions now will make the difference on whether we get the crisis under control. G20 countries must set the example and call on others to avoid counterproductive policy responses such as export restrictions and stockpiling, which distort markets and further drive up prices.
Our situation here in 2022 is going to be projected to be deteriorated further. And this is not good news for all of us. The unresolved COVID-19 pandemic, as well as the unfolding war in Ukraine, are likely to exacerbate the already severe 2022 acute food insecurity that we are all already seeing. In addition to that, a looming fertilizer crisis also has the potential to further exacerbate and extend food crisis even into 2023 and beyond.
And over in Sri Lanka, Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe has been sworn in as acting president as the country reels from an economic crisis and unrest. He replaces Gotabaya Rajapaksa, who fled to Singapore after unprecedented mass protests, which saw demonstrators overrun the presidential palace. Protesters defied a curfew to celebrate his resignation during the night. Sri Lanka is experiencing economic chaos as it faces an acute shortage of food, fuel, and other basic supplies.
Celebrations broke out on the streets of Colombo after the resignation of Sri Lankan President Gotabaya Rajapaksa. Protesters had massed outside the presidential secretariat, defying a citywide curfew.
The whole country will celebrate today because it's a big victory. Actually, this Rajapaksa corrupted family, we never thought we will get this country free from them. That much we were struggling, and they were hitting us, they were hitting from the tear gas, they were shooting us. There are so many people who are in the hospitals, people were dying. Still, people never give up this peace protest. So finally we won one mission, and there's another mission, and there will be more missions on behalf of the country. We will not going to stop. We are going to protest against all of the corrupted leaders who is going to see it in the future. Thank you.
According to his spokesperson, Rajapaksa submitted his resignation by email late on Thursday, hours after he fled to Singapore following mass protests over an economic meltdown. A day after, a sense of calm has returned to the streets of the capital following Rajapaksa's resignation.
We are so happy. We are so happy. We are won the struggle. We got lots of struggle. You know, we got police have given so many struggles, so many hardships. We won everything, and we are so happy today that he has resigned. And we feel that when the people come together, we can do everything. We are the real power in this country.
Many in Sri Lanka blame Rajapaksa for the country's worsening situation, with runaway inflation, shortages of basic goods such as fuel and food impacting everyday life. His close political ally, Ranil Wickremesinghe, remains firmly in place and has now been sworn in as acting president. Speaking after his swearing-in, he vowed to follow constitutional process and establish law and order in the country.
In the short time I have, I will create the background for the new president, who is to be elected next week, to bring the 19th Amendment to the Constitution quickly. I will take immediate steps to establish the rule of law and peace in the country. I accept 100% the right to peaceful protest, but some are trying to do acts of sabotage.
Whether Sri Lanka's public would accept the acting president is another matter, because Mr. Wickremesinghe's resignation as Prime Minister was a key demand of protesters. Earlier this week, crowds stormed the former Prime Minister's compound, clashing with security forces. The process of Parliament electing a new president will begin on Saturday, with MPs expected to take a vote in a week's time.
The U.S. President Joe Biden has concluded the first leg of his Middle East trip in Israel and is now on his way to Saudi Arabia. Is expected to discuss energy supply, human rights and security cooperation. Awaiting his arrival in Riyadh, residents say they're hopeful that Saudi Arabia's relationship with the United States is on the mend. President Biden will hold meetings with Saudi Arabia's King Salman bin Abdulaziz and Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, along with other government officials.
We've been hearing a lot of interesting news about the relationship between Saudi Arabia and the United States, and it drew a lot of concern to people all around the world. People are curious to know whether the relationship will be severed or it will be mended. And seeing that Biden is now taking the step to come to Saudi Arabia, it shows that an effort to recalibrate and strengthen the Saudi and U.S. bilateral relationship.
Now, Saudi Arabia says it will open its airspace to all air carriers, paving the way for more overflights to and from Israel, a further sign that relations between the two countries are warming. The Saudi General Authority of Civil Aviation said the country's airspace is now open to all carriers that meet its requirements for overflights, in line with international conventions that say there should be no discrimination between civil aircraft. According to GACA, the decision will complement the efforts aimed at consolidating the kingdom's position as a global hub connecting 3 continents and to enhance international air connectivity. The announcement of an open skies policy by Riyadh will mean shorter flights from Asia to Israel, as airlines serving those routes will no longer be required to take long detours around Saudi Arabia en route to Israel.
Today is an historic day after intense behind-the-scenes diplomacy with Saudi Arabia and the United States. Saudi airspace will now be open to Israeli airlines. I would like to thank President Biden for his visit here in Israel and for his commitment to a strong Israel and prosperous Israel and the region. And I wish him success in his meetings in Jeddah. Thank you very much. זה צעד רשמי ראשון של נורמליזציה מול ערב הסעודית. ההחלטה תאפשר לחברות התעופה הישראליות לטוס במסלול ישיר לאסיה ולאוסטרליה. אני מברך את ההנהגה הסעודית על פתיחת המרחב האווירי. זה צעד ראשון. אנחנו נמשיך לעבוד על זה בזהירות המתבקשת למען הכלכלה הישראלית, הביטחון הישראלי ואזרחי ישראל.
We'll have more on President Biden's Mid-East trip in a moment, but moving on to Europe. The European Commission has cut its forecast for economic growth in the Eurozone for this year and next, and revised up its estimates for inflation, largely due to the impact of the war in Ukraine. In its quarterly forecast, Brussels confirmed its more downbeat outlook, which it had already discussed with Eurozone finance ministers on Monday. The EU executive now predicts growth of 2.6% this year for the 19-country currency bloc, slightly less than the 2.7% it had forecast in May. But next year, when the impact of the Ukraine war and of higher energy prices may be felt even more acutely, growth is now forecast to be 1.4% instead of the 2.3% previously estimated. At a news conference, EU Economy Commissioner Paolo Gentiloni also said the fall of the euro to parity against the dollar was a major concern, largely for developing economies rather than for the Eurozone, because the euro was appreciating against other major currencies.
We identified in the previous forecast many risks, and many of them have materialized. We identified risks such as shocks reverberating from an unpredictable evolution of the energy market. We mentioned tighter financial conditions and a global economic slowdown. All these risks have materialized, of course, to various degrees. One could say that the European economy is moving from a phase of slowing growth to one of putting on the brakes. Growth next year is now projected at 1.5%, 0.8 points lower compared to the previous forecast. Overall, annual inflation in 22 is projected at 7.6 in the euro area and 8.3 in the EU. Next year, it should decelerate to 4% in the euro area and 4.6 in the EU. And these figures are more than 1 percentage point higher than in the forecast 2 months ago. The euro is showing its strength, but the dollar is strengthening more as in this situation, and we have to be aware of the fact that this appreciation of the dollar will have very serious consequences, especially for emerging economies. Io parlo spesso di acque agitate, no? Troubled waters. E in queste acque agitate, quindi la guerra, l'alta inflazione, i rischi energetici, le tensioni geopolitiche, la stabilità è un valore in sé, e penso che in questo momento serva coesione, non procurare instabilità, e quindi noi seguiamo l'evoluzione della situazione italiana, ovviamente con tutto il distacco del caso dal punto di vista ufficiale, dal punto di vista personale il distacco è un po' più relativo, ma comunque la seguiamo con, direi, preoccupato stupore.
DW's Andrea Napori in Berlin joins us now for more on this. Andrea, speak to us a bit more about the EU forecast and what officials are saying.
Yes, the EU Commission, that's the executive arm of the European Union, publishes this forecast every 3 months. The one that was published yesterday didn't revise the estimates for 2022. Instead, it slashed those for 2023. We are now expecting the EU economy to grow only 1.5% instead of 2.3%. Numbers aside, that means that the EU Commission is confirming that we have to buckle up for a harsh winter. Yes, and the European Commission also confirmed that the blame for this has to be put on Russia and the Russian invasion of Ukraine, because that's the main driver behind the higher energy prices, and that in turn is the main driver behind a way higher than expected inflation. We're going to close the year at 8% or more than 8% inflation. That of course means that purchasing power for consumers is eroding, has effects on the larger economy, and prices are going up for everyone here in Europe.
Okay, Andrew, what are the EU governments doing to limit the impact on their citizens, though?
There have been some local initiatives already being taken. For example, here in Germany, we have the €9 monthly ticket for regional trains and public transportation. That's meant to incentivize people to use the car less and therefore save on fuel. There will be an increase in childcare benefits, some tax bonuses. But these are all measures that are both local and limited in time and scope. What we're really waiting for is the usual solution for high inflation, and that will be a raise of interest rates. The European Central Bank is going to do just that. On the 21st of July, we're going to see the first hike in 11 years. Now, the fact that rates were so low for so long in the EU means that also a weak European economy might withstand higher rates. But the European Central Bank has to tread very carefully here, because there are so many potential shock factors, such as the Russian war in Ukraine, higher energy prices indeed, but also the lack of gas supplies for Europe in winter. All those shock factors might contribute to send the European economy into recession.
Okay, and the euro also reached parity with the US dollar. What could be the consequences of that, both for Europe and its trade partners in Africa?
Well, that is a clear indicator of the lower confidence that markets have in Europe right now. The US economy, despite higher inflation, appears to be less affected than the EU by the war in Ukraine and the energy crisis. And that, of course, has been driving up the value of the dollar. For Europe, the main impact will be on US-denominated imports. It will cost more. Exports might instead be more attractive. Of course, the parity has also effects on a global scale beyond Europe. When it comes to Africa, a weak euro might affect, for example, the remittances economy. Tens of billions of euros are sent by workers in Europe every year to their families, even to Nigeria, and that will, of course, means that they will receive less and have less buying power. Now, especially when the euro is exchanged in dollars, of course, or in local currencies. But countries with a lot of imports denominated in US dollars or debt denominated in US dollars also feel the hit. There's also some upside to close on a positive note. Countries with a lot of exports in Africa, especially when it comes to oil or other commodities and resources, those are traded in dollars, of course, and will certainly benefit from a stronger US dollar. Especially considering the very special situation here. Despite a strong US dollar, the EU weakening is due mostly to the war in Ukraine, the energy crisis, and that has been sending the prices for oil and resources up. That means that if you're selling resources in US dollar, you might benefit from that as a country.
All right, then the DW's Andrew Napori, thank you so much for the update. We'll head back to the United States now, where our correspondent Maria Bird has been following President Joe Biden's Middle East trip. She joins us now for more. Maria, today President Biden met with the Palestinian president. Speak to us a bit more about that, regarding what they spoke about, and most importantly, was he able to mend relations strained under the Trump administration?
You know, President Biden has hit on the fact that he is a foreign affairs expert. That has been what he ran on for the election. And so his work with the Palestinians, his work with Israel as a whole has been a long stint of his career. He spent much time in Congress even doing that type of work, and obviously with the Obama administration. And so now he's looking at being able to not only, as you talked about, mend the ties. I mean, he believes that he can come in and be a peacemaker. And so was he able to do that? I mean, he was the first president that is now going from Israel directly to Saudi Arabia. And so some of the very bold moves that he's making, his first trip over there and his first visit was one of really about respect, one about solidarity. And so I think he's bringing a message of solidarity and a message of continuing to look to how he can, obviously bring peace in the region. And so I think that President Trump's administration is one that was very different. I think that because we're not talking about someone that's new to the presidential scene, President Biden has obviously been a vice president before. I think Palestinians were very comfortable with him. And so, but I think the real question is, where does the U.S. stand? Is President Biden going to do more than a commitment to nuclear weaponry banning with Iran? Is he going to do more than just speaking out on the issue? And is he going to definitely show action in that? And I think that is at the crux of what the Palestinians were hoping to hear more from, and to hopefully see a stronger stance from U.S. President Biden.
And Marie, you mentioned Iran there. During his visit to Israel, President Biden and caretaker Prime Minister Yair Lapid signed a joint pledge to deny Iran nuclear weapons, which the Islamic Republic denies seeking. Speak to us a bit more about that.
Well, this pledge is one that will obviously put the U.S. in a unilateral position in that regard with Palestine on this. And so I think that was a way in which the U.S., as we've seen time and time again, the U.S. is really trying to bring forth many agreements all across the world to really build allies. And I think this is a form of another alliance that the U.S. hopes to have, especially as it relates to being able to speak against and going against nuclear weaponry with Iran. Now, whether or not this pledge is going to do anything more than just a pledge, and I think that's what Palestine is hoping for.
Okay, and now to the Saudi Arabia trip. The White House has said the trip, is designed to reset the U.S. relationship with the kingdom. How does the president plan on doing this? What's on the agenda, especially in light of the Khashoggi killing?
You're exactly correct. His entire trip to the Middle East has been really focused on this day, focused on his visit in Saudi Arabia. As you mentioned, the Khashoggi killing is one that he even spoke about during his campaign and his run, spoke out vehemently against that. But the reality is, as he stated, and I think he was kind of pushed to come out with why he was going, we're in a major oil crisis. Gas prices in the U.S., yes, have gone down slightly, but are at the highest it's been in many years. We are looking at record inflation rates. And so he knows that right now that is a major concern for the U.S. And that's why, he is now going to visit. The real question is, people are even down to discussing whether or not he'll shake hands, how they will greet one another. And so I think this is going to be a very defining moment for his administration. Many congressional members, whether or not they sit on the Republican or Democratic side of the House, are a bit concerned about this visit and feel that this is not the best move for the president. But he is hopeful, and I think that his hope is that he will be able to still show his dissatisfaction and and denouncing the killing of Khashoggi while still going to meet at the kingdom in Saudi Arabia. So I think that we will begin to see throughout the weekend how this will all pan out as far as the public's response.
All right, then, Maria, thanks a lot for the update. And back in Europe, Italy is stuck in political limbo after Italian Prime Minister Mario Draghi tendered his resignation in the wake of a mutiny by a coalition partner. The country might need early elections to overcome a political deadlock. President Sergio Mattarella rejected Draghi's resignation on Thursday and asked him to address Parliament next week to get a clearer picture of the political situation. Giovanni Orsina, a historical professor at the University in Rome, says that although the situation seems bleak, it did not represent an end-of-the-world scenario.
Also, for me, as Italian, it's very complicated to understand why the five-star movement decided to kill the Prime Minister and the government. In this difficult moment for Italy, for Europe, for the world, inflation, the price of the energy, the price of the raw materials, the necessity to implement the recovery plan in my country through reforms. It's incredible. This populistic party is working against Italy, against Europe. For this, for us, in the future is very difficult to cooperate in the government, national unity with this party, because in this moment we need to be serious.
What is the most likely outcome? If we vote in October, it is very difficult for the Partito Democratico to be able to create a coalition with the five-star. And anyway, if we go to an early dissolution and the responsibility is clearly falling on the five-star, it is to be expected that the five-star is going to pay a price for that in the elections. So basically this would mean that the center-left coalition would go to the elections either as a non-coalition, that is to say each party by itself, or as a very weak coalition. This basically raises the possibility for a center-right victory, which in the event of an election in October would become, I would say, very likely. Not certain, but very likely. So what we might have is a majority of center-right, and if the electoral polls are to be trusted, in that majority, Giorgia Meloni's Brothers of Italy would be the most important political force. So I wouldn't say this is the end of the world. I would say Italy will go on, will stay inside the Atlantic Alliance, will be a trustworthy partner of the in the European Union, and is going to govern itself economically. That being said, certainly in these last 18 months, Draghi's presence has been very relevant in giving prestige and force to Italy, which has also been important in all the Atlantic and the European negotiations. So I'm not saying this is not a loss. This is a loss. I wouldn't say this is an end-of-the-world loss. I know that there is the tendency to see Italy always on the brink of collapse. As an historian, I can say Italy has been seen on the brink of collapse for the last 40 years, but it has never collapsed. And it is not going to collapse this time either, even without Draghi. That being said, I felt more reassured with Draghi there than without Draghi there.
Residents and holidaymakers have fled towns and villages in France as fires are whipped up by high winds and tinder-dry conditions in several countries in Europe. More than 10,000 people have been forced to leave the southwestern Gironde region in the past few days. Dozens of fires are burning in Portugal and Spain, where temperatures have surged above 40 degrees Celsius. At least 281 deaths in the two countries have been linked to the heat wave. Several towns in western Spain have also been evacuated. Heat waves have become more frequent, more intense, and last longer because of human-induced climate change. The world has already warmed up by about 1.1 degrees Celsius since the industrial era began, and temperatures will keep rising unless governments around the world make steep cuts to emissions, according to scientists. And the World Meteorological Organization says vulnerable people are particularly at risk as heat waves scorch much of Europe. Earlier, the UK's Met Office issued a red warning, with the WMO saying that Britain's previous record high of 38.7 degrees Celsius has a 30% chance of being broken this year. The WMO's Lorenzo Labrador says that in addition to the danger posed by high temperatures, heat waves also leave the atmosphere stagnant, with increased pollutants and degraded air quality, especially in towns and cities.
This into context, the highest registered temperature in the UK was 38.7 degrees Celsius in Cambridge back in 2019. A Met Office spokesperson said there was a 30% chance that this record could be broken this year. Expansion of a high-pressure system over the Atlantic, known as the Azores High, is leading to the driest conditions on the Iberian Peninsula in the last 1,000 years. The area of high pressure currently sitting over the UK will progressively move east across north-central Europe and reach the northern Balkans by the middle of next week. This will result in high temperatures for much of Western Central Europe throughout this week and most of next week as well.
Well, climate scientist Hannah Cloak says the infrastructure and housing in Britain would need to adapt in order to cope with the rising intensity and frequency of heat waves due to climate change. But people could take some practical steps to help them keep cool in the meantime, such as using curtains in the daytime to shut out heat and opening windows in the evening to flush out hot air.
It's been very hot here in the UK for a number of days now, but as we're looking towards the weekend and certainly Monday and Tuesday, we're looking at these temperatures in the low 30s, which is pretty high for the UK. And there is still this possibility of, reaching up towards 40 degrees and breaking those records that we have here in the UK. And that's very frightening in a way that even some of the computer models are picking up these extremely high temperatures. And certainly even in the low 30s, we're going to see people really struggling in the heat and the infrastructure struggling. So it's harder to cope with these types of temperatures in the UK because we're just not used to them. So our bodies are not acclimatized to these types of things. We also don't know what to do in the heat. So I really encourage people to close their curtains during the middle of the day when it's hottest, close the windows, keep the heat out, because it's not obvious. Because in the UK, we're used to trying to keep our houses warm, and so we use curtains in a different way. So it's about that lived experience of the heat. And we don't have the houses designed to keep cool. We don't have air conditioning. Our infrastructure is not built for the heat at all. Using water as a really easy way to cool down. Put your feet in a bucket of water, get a wet flannel and put it over yourself. And then later on, cool the house down overnight if you can by opening up those windows and letting the air flow through to take away the heat that's built up during the day.
Over in Africa, Moroccan authorities are battling to put out multiple wildfires, burning through forests in 4 provinces in the north amid a heat wave. Hundreds of families have been evacuated as a precaution from Larache and Taza provinces, and transport in the areas has been disrupted. No casualties have been reported so far. Firefighters, soldiers and police officers have been trying to prevent the fires from causing more destruction. But strong winds, the forest density, and a difficult terrain have slowed the efforts. The country, which has had intense droughts, has recently been hit by soaring temperatures. The fire has reportedly burnt at least 2,500 acres of forest so far. And Haiti's main fuel terminal has resumed operations after a severe wave of gang violence forced it to close last week. The Varex terminal in the Round-Down Cité Soleil area, the scene of battles between 2 rival gangs, and its closure had caused petrol shortages. The terminal operator tweeted late on Thursday that a tanker carrying 45,000 barrels of imported fuel had arrived. Since last week, 89 people have been killed in the area, which is at the outskirts of the capital, Port-au-Prince. In recent days, hundreds of protesters have been burning tires and blocking roads, demanding urgent action to restore the supply of petrol. Gang violence has shot up since the assassination of President Jovenel Moise by mercenaries a year ago. And the UN mission in Mali has been informed by the Malian authorities of a coordination meeting to be held between the relevant Malian structures and MINUSMA prior to the planned rotation of contingents. Speaking on the situation in Mali, UN Deputy Spokesperson Farhan Haq says the mission takes note of the communication and stands ready to participate in the discussions without delay. He adds that MINUSMA informed personnel are deployed in Mali in supportive of efforts to promote lasting peace and security in the country.
This morning, by the UN mission in Mali, MINUSMA, was informed this morning by the Malian authorities of a coordination meeting to be held between the relevant Malian structures and MINUSMA prior to the planned rotation of contingents. The mission takes note of this communication and stands ready to participate in the discussions without delay. The rotation of contingents is crucially important for the mission's operational effectiveness and the safety and security of personnel. All efforts must be made for an urgent settlement, especially since some of the staff concerned should have been relieved several months ago. MINUSMA uniformed personnel are deployed in Mali in support of efforts to promote lasting peace and security in the country.
And finally on the program, when the traffic lights turn red and vehicles start to queue, Venezuelan dancer Kenya Mendez puts on his modified helmet and slides headfirst between the waiting cars in the crowded streets of Caracas. The 27-year-old breakdancer went viral on social media with videos showing him performing a so-called headslide on the streets of Venezuela's capital, defying all rules of gravity. Mendez's dream is not only to win the Guinness World Record for the longest headslide, but also to participate in the 2024 Olympic Games with Venezuela's national break dancing team. To make a living, Mendez dances daily at traffic lights in the streets of Caracas, and at the end of the day, he meets with his fellow dancers to train and practice his best tricks, hoping one day to bring home Olympic gold. Mendez has been practicing the urban dance for 15 years at a recreational level, and after 8 years in the discipline, he began to dedicate himself professionally to breakdancing. Breakdancing was among 4 sports, along with skateboarding, sports climbing, and surfing, that the IOC provisionally agreed to add to the Paris Games in 2024 to attract a younger, more urban audience. Awesome stuff. Wish him all the best. And that's the program today. I'm Teniola Shibwale. Thank you so much for watching.